What is up, folks? This is Addy Ads, and this is Public Intelligence. We got a great guest today, GoodLawgic YouTube channel, Mr. Joe Nierman, who's the New York litigator and one of the few people, along with myself, who has been at the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell every single day. And we're going to get his take. He's got a unique take because of his expertise in litigation and law, and really been looking forward to this one. I'm going to recap not just this week, but the first 2 weeks of the trial, where it's going, and where it may end. So I want to thank you for coming on the show, Mr. Newman.
My privilege. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And his Twitter, YouTube, Venmo, and Patreon are in the show notes. If people want to go and subscribe and or support, would be much appreciated. And just generally, how do you think this week went? Week 2 of the trial, the prosecution rested, as we saw. What's your take, sir?
So the days are starting to blur together as to like when we got what information from this trial. I mean, I can go in order as far as different people testifying and what we got from it. One of the I think that we had what for me is the emotional moment of the trial this week, and we also had some bad moments for the prosecution this week. For me, the emotional moment of the trial really came out of the blue, and it was testimony from Carolyn on redirect, where if you read the transcript, it looks very bland, if not almost harmful to the prosecution. But if you were live in person, as you and I were, I'm not sure if you were there for the last 5 minutes, because it was literally the last 5 minutes of testimony, I think I want to say on Tuesday.
Yeah, you're right. I think it was Tuesday.
The last 5 minutes there was just gut-wrenching drama in ways that I don't think I could appropriately describe. When Carolyn was the third victim to testify, and she was the one who testified under her real name is Carolyn. She never gave her last name to retain some anonymity, and she only spent like an hour to an hour and a quarter on direct, where she was being questioned by Maureen Comey. And then Jeff Paliuka spent 4.5 hours just ramming at her credibility and bringing up statements that she had made in an action that she brought in 2008 against Epstein and Sarah Kellen, and others she brought against those two individuals in 2009, statements she made to the FBI, statements in her interrogatories, and so much inconsistency, most specifically and most damning with respect to what years she was engaged in these activities with Epstein, and made her seem wholly not credible. And if you didn't watch the testimony, you couldn't appreciate the stark difference between Carolyn and the first two victims. Specifically, even on first blush, when she first comes out, you have to realize that the first two victims are women who have had, in the wake of their experience with Epstein, very successful careers, really successful careers that when they take the stand and you hear about their careers, they're enviable to almost anyone. They're living the American dream, in the sense that the first one has been a soap opera star for 22 years. She's a beautiful woman, even in her 40s now. And anyone in the jury who looks at her she doesn't strike as a sympathetic character. When you looked at Jane, both of that too was a pseudonym, and she testifies. I mean, she's an international supermodel, and you look at her and you're like, okay, look, she obviously was engaged in activities when she was very young, but she was 17, not like 16, 15, 14, and though she was certainly put in disgustingly awful conditions by Epstein, and Sarah in particular, that was really orchestrated exclusively by Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, she met Maxwell, and her goal in forming that relationship was to emulate and become like Ghislaine. She admired Ghislaine and looked at that as a life that she wanted to have. And ironically, she probably had a life that far that far supersedes the life that Ghislaine had. But in order to develop that relationship, she basically started catering to whatever Ghislaine wanted, and Ghislaine wanted her to basically become a sex slave to Epstein. And so she caved into that. And so there we see, it's a very strong statement as to Ghislaine's role, which is what the key to this whole trial is. You have to get Jeff Epstein's terrible activities out there so we can understand why Ghislaine's activities are so damaging to these victims. But it's not a trial about Jeff Epstein. It's about Ghislaine Maxwell. And Sarah did a great job of basically portraying how she was the honey trap. She lured these women in. She made them feel comfortable. And in many times, we heard it later with Annie Farmer, how like she was the chaperone. She was always the one who was supposed to be the safety net protecting these girls. And quite the contrary, she was literally setting them up to walk into harm. The least of which, really, honestly, is with Carolyn. There's very little that was said about Ghislaine's role with respect to Carolyn herself. But I started talking about, this dramatic testimony with respect to Carolyn. And when she's talking, she comes out there as opposed to the victim, Jane, number one, and victim two of Kate. She comes out there and rather than looking like a model, she looks like someone who works for the DMV. And she looks like she's my age. I'm over 50. And it turns out that she's like in her early 30s. But life has destroyed her. And you hear her tale, and it's awful, even before she met Epstein. I mean, this is a woman who was suffering abuse from her own grandfather of the very worst kind that any little girl could possibly suffer. And that's at the age of 4. And then, like, when she's a teenager, she drops out of school in 7th grade, and she comes across Virginia Roberts, and Virginia Roberts introduces her and says, hey, you want to make some cash? And, she's like, sure, we just have to massage some old guy. And the next thing you know, she's in this situation where she's watching this friend who introduced her to Jeff Epstein literally climb on the table and just start going to town and satisfying him. And she's like mortified the first time she sees it, but there's $300. And to a girl who like basically doesn't have much, coming from a very poor neighborhood, where the mother was an alcoholic, there's no talk of her father being around at all. And she's like, you know what? $300 is $300. And she's 14. I mean, she's just 14 years old, and she's coming back there, and her boyfriend is involved in it. Her boyfriend turns out like is pretty much a pimp, bringing her and a couple of other girls along and when you hear her story, and she's told her story, as I mentioned earlier, she's told her story over many times, in various actions, civil actions, when she was trying to get some sort of financial remuneration for what she sustained. And she's not a sharp individual. She's not bright. So she gets very easily confused. She's really, I would certainly say well below average. I'm not saying that she's Forrest Gump level, but she's well below average intellect. So she gets confused about years. And it could be because of genetics, it could be because of drugs, it could be because of what she says, the abuse that she sustained. It could be anything. But there was so much about her story when she was telling on direct rang true to me, only because she was crying in moments that I never would have expected her to be crying. I don't know if you noticed this. Like, she would start crying sometimes, or like breaking down at odd times, not when she's talking about the abuse, but when she's questioned on direct, what did you do with the money? And she would start crying, saying that she used it to buy more drugs. And if I was writing a script, that's not where I would tell the actor to cry. But you could see the regret about the choices she's made in her life. And I was like, wow, that rings really much truer, because I wouldn't think to cry then, but you can see the genuine regret she has about her life and the situation she's been in, as well as the choices that she's made herself. And then you have 4 hours of Jeff Pagliuca just pointing out one change to another. And, people have asked me, why didn't the U.S. get her story straight? There was no story to get straight, because she told 3 different stories before she took the stand. And when she took the stand, she basically told a 4th story. All these stories are generally consistent with each other, but slight variations, like who was driving the car the first time you went to Jeffrey Epstein. So one time she says Virginia, one time she says it's Tony, it could be the boyfriend. It's like, okay, does that really matter at the end of the day? No. But as far as telling a story over that sounds credible, that's a way of knocking her credibility. And throughout the cross-examination, you could see her frustration, because she sees that she's getting pounded about these different statements that she's made, and he's like, didn't you tell the police this? She's like, I don't remember. And I'll show her a document saying, this is a statement you said. She goes, I guess I did. Why? And she'll be like, why does this matter? Why does this matter? And because she's Carolyn, she's not Jane or Kate, who are much stronger and had, a relatively healthy afterlife to the Epstein episode. But she's Carolyn, who's been weathered by life, beaten down by life, and probably, engaged in drugs for extended periods of time. Because she's Carolyn, she doesn't have her details down accurately. But that doesn't mean she wasn't abused. And she's sitting there in a courtroom in a venue where she's totally a fish out of water and doesn't understand even why it is that they're asking her about a civil action that she filed against Epstein and Sarah Kellen. And she's like, over there, I was talking about Epstein and Kellen. What does that have to do with Ghislaine? And they're like, well, you never mentioned Ghislaine in that other thing. And her answer made I just want to point this out. Her answer made a lot of sense. Let me point out to, like, right now, if someone was asked to describe this event they're watching, you and me talking right now, and they were talking about, like, that time that, the people who they've listened to who are wearing baseball hats. So they'll fixate on the fact that I'm wearing this NYPD hat. It's like that time I was listening to a guy wearing a baseball hat, as opposed to the time they wouldn't fixate necessarily on the fact that there's a GoodLawgic sign behind me here, because you fixate on what's relevant to the topic. So yeah, that doesn't mean that sign isn't behind me, but you're not really talking about that. So when she's filing a civil action against Sarah Kellen and against Jeffrey Epstein, she's going to fixate on their activities and not talk very much, if at all, about what Ghislaine Maxwell did. But what the defense was basically saying is, all along, you never really talked about Ghislaine. You kept talking about Sarah and Jeff, Sarah and Jeff, Sarah and Jeff, and all these different statements. And she doesn't understand why that's an effective way of trying to paint her as someone who is now changing her story. So that's why she's like confused. And when we get to the very end, this is why I felt it was like so powerful. It was breaking my heart. Like when I was describing it afterwards, I started like welling up talking about it. It's that Maureen Comey got up there and some brilliant lawyering, instead of trying to keep the tone calm, she actually started barking at Maureen and getting Maureen to cry, like really hard cry she screamed out at her, did you draft the complaint in 2008? And she's screaming, no. And she's like, did you draft the complaint in 2009? No. If you just read the text of the transcript, which is what everyone's doing, anyone who's reading, following this, it just says, did you draft the complaint in 2008? No. Did you draft it in 2009? No. Did you draft the interrogatories? No. Did you ever look at the FBI statement before today? No. But the actual context of what we all heard is, did you ever see that FBI statement before today? And she's screaming and crying, no. Like, it's a whole different testimony that you and I were privileged to watch. And there's really like millions of people will never know about. They'll never see it. The only people saw you, me, and basically, a bunch of reporters and the jury. And the jury is all that matters at the end of the day. And when she's sitting there and she says, did Jeffrey, you read the text and it's like, did Jeffrey Epstein touch you when you were 15? Yes. What year was that? I don't know. Did Jeffrey Epstein touch you when you were 14? Yes. What year was that? I don't know. Did he touch you when you were 13? Yes. What year was that? I don't know. But the actual testimony was, did he touch you when you were 15 years old? And she's crying out, like screaming, yes. What year is that? And she looks so addled and confused, scream back, I don't know. It reads totally different. It's not even the same conversation as what people are reading. So that's why, and over, did you touch her at 14? Yes. What year was that? I don't know. It's like and why doesn't she know? Because she's Carolyn. It's not that it didn't happen. It's that she's Carolyn. And Carolyn is not very bright, and she's had a very confusing life, and she's had a very difficult life, and she's been hit by trauma after trauma her entire life, and consumed a lot of drugs. And she's, and working through the system in this case or in that case. And by now she doesn't know anymore. She really doesn't. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I think she could smell her credibility was being shot to hell. And she doesn't understand why, because she knows this really happened. And she starts screaming about how there's no justice in the world. And how can we get justice after this woman ruined my life? And that, it's never going to happen. And her so compelling that the defense desperately screamed objection. And and the judge is like, I have to ask you to stop for a moment. Like when she was just railing her how her life has been miserable because of this woman. And as a defense counsel, as a litigator, I understand defense counsel is like, objection, and the judge says, I need to stop you for a second. What's the basis of your objection? And what you thought he was going to say is, she's killing my client. But, objection, she's destroying my defense here. But instead it was, objection, narrative. So she's like, the judge is like, yeah, okay, I'll let the answer stand, but I'll ask you to move on to the next question. And then Maureen is like, do you have any possible financial gain from testifying against Ghislaine Maxwell today? And she said, no further questions, done. And I'll tell you, from a moral perspective, from a gut-wrenching perspective, from what really genuinely moves a jury perspective, it was more powerful than anything you could have imagined. Much more powerful than Jane crying at the end of her redirect about how she'll never be able to get things back. That just, to some people, her crying was very powerful. I personally didn't find it nearly as powerful as Carolyn. And that's just my take on it. It seemed much more scripted than Carolyn there, who's just crying out in her confusion about how her life has been decimated. So so to me, that was a massive moment, not so much from a legal perspective, because from a legal perspective of things, the state has a much weaker case with respect to Carolyn than they do on Jane. The other, from a legal perspective, the most important thing was a moment that you heard. You actually was sitting in front of me for this part. Your viewers don't realize that there's a few different viewing rooms that they put for journalists or people like, people who are not credentialed like me to come and attend, and anyone can go in there. And you just need to go through security and go up to the room, and you could sit there and you could take notes or just watch, because and eat popcorn if the security guard doesn't see you eating. And people like me, I'm sitting there just like scribbling until my hand is cramping up. But you were actually sitting in front of me. I remember this because I remember your reaction when Mark Rogers, the second pilot, testifies up on the stand. And from a legal perspective of things, the key victim that's most likely from a legal perspective to really hang Ghislaine Maxwell is the first one who testified, Jane. And
okay, wow.
It's that she's the main one, because this is what you need to understand. For federal charges, you need to have interstate activity. So so we heard Jane's story, we heard Kate's story, we heard Carolyn's story, and then we heard Annie Farmer's story. But the jury was already told that with respect to two of them, which is Kate and Annie, you can't convict for them because they were above minimum age when they were in the location that they ended up engaging in these activities. And it has to be that it's transporting across state line for the purpose of illegal activity. Well, Kate was 17. She's brought to New York. In New York, 17 is age of consent. So that's not illegal activity. So all it does is it shows us how they operate, but you can't, the jury is not permitted to convict on the basis of what happened to Kate. With respect to what happened to Annie Farmer, again, the jury got the same instruction. You can't convict based on what happened to Annie Farmer. Why? Because she was taken to New Mexico. And as it happens, and she was 16, and in New Mexico, the minimum age of consent is 16. So she's not taken across state lines for illegal. It sucks that that's the law, but that is the law. So you can't just ignore what the law is and say, well, we hate her. She's an evil woman. She's disgusting. So she should be convicted. That's the law. So what are you going to do? So now all we're left with is Jane and Carolyn. And even Carolyn, well, what interstate activity do we have with Carolyn? She kept testifying that they wanted to take her out of the state, but she kept saying, I can't go. I'm only 14. My mother won't let. That's what she kept saying. I can't go. My mother won't let.
Yeah.
So she never left Florida. She's in Florida the whole time. So where do you have interstate activity with her? Well, the statute expressly states that if you use the mail or any sort of courier system interstate for the purpose of inducing a illegal activity, that too is a basis of a federal conviction.
Oh,
so that's why they bring in the whole FedEx thing. And they're like, you see, they sent from New York to Florida this FedEx package that had lingerie in it, clearly, and also these different tickets for Incubus or whatever, or movies, whatever they had in there, then their little gift package that they sent from New York. That is interstate delivery, which for the purpose of inducing further sexual activity, illegal sexual activity. And she was clearly very young at the time, so it was illegal what was happening there. And that's how you get it to be a federal charge. So that's why they keep bringing up this whole FedEx thing. I was like, why do they keep covering this FedEx? Who gives a damn about the stupid FedEx package? That's why. Because you don't have a threshold to make it illegal unless you could show that. But what happened to Carolyn, the problem that happened from the perspective of the United States, is that when they brought in the FedEx expert there, and they talked about Jeffrey Epstein's account, so basically it showed that it was Jeffrey Epstein who sent it, not Ghislaine Maxwell. So how are you convicting Ghislaine Maxwell on this? It's a very tough thing to prove with respect to Carolyn. So I think Carolyn is important as far as making the jury feel that they want to punish Ghislaine. That's in many ways more important than anything, is you want to make them feel a hunger to convict Ghislaine Maxwell. And with Jane, even though her story is not as heart-wrenching, there is enough there from a legal perspective to nail Ghislaine Maxwell. Specifically, and this is where you have the most significant testimony that I was talking about, that you were sitting like 2 rows in front of me, and like I saw you directly in front of me, where you heard, I don't know if you remember, like I screamed out like, "Oh!" and you were like, "Yeah."
Yeah, I do remember that. I remember that.
And what happened was, see, you guys who are watching need to understand is Jane basically, she said that she was taken from Florida to New York like 10 times before she turned 17, and the flight logs that they have. But she's a little confused about dates and things like that. And on cross-examination, she got hammered about the dates. But the flight logs that Mark Rogers produced showed a person by first name, that same Jane is a pseudonym, but the same first name as Jane is. Let's pretend her name really was Jane. So it says the word Jane there, and no last name. And there's one flight that happened on November 11th, 1996, another that happened on May 9th, 1997, at which point our Jane, as in Jane the victim, was still 16. She turned 17 that summer in like August. She was born in 1980. So she would have turned 17 in August of 1997, at which point she would have been legal, and there wouldn't have been any problem with it. And there are flight logs which have her full name after she turned 17, but you can't convict for that because that's not illegal. So the key flights are these 2 flights that happened before she's 17. But now we come down to the question that the flight log only says the name Jane, doesn't say her last name. Maybe it was a different Jane. And what the defense was trying to pound home this theory that it was a different Jane. You don't know it's the same Jane. And when they were asking the pilot, you don't remember flying Jane in 1996, do you? You remember her being on a plane at some point. Do you remember that happened in 1996, not in 1998? So he's like, without looking at your book, would you know when it was? He said no. I only know from looking at the book. Well, when you look at your book, all you see there is the name Jane. Maybe it was a different Jane. In fact, isn't it true that Jeffrey Epstein had a personal assistant with the same name, Jane, spelled the exact same way as Jane spells her name? So, and she flew on your plane. So maybe it was that Jane. And the defense has been trying to pound this home to raise reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury that we don't know it was that Jane. It was possibly personal assistant Jane or a different Jane. So that's what they're trying to pound home, that the most likely theory as to why you should find a reasonable doubt as to whether or not she flew on this plane is the fact that we don't know the last name of the Jane in the logbook that occurred before victim Jane turned 17. But the key, all of a sudden, out of the blue, while he's talking about this whole thing about which Jane it is, like the pilot sort of like a light bulb went on his head. He's like, wait a second. It could not have been Jane, the personal assistant, because I didn't meet her until 2003. Yeah. And that's why I screamed out, "Oh!"
Yeah, I remember that. I was like, oh, bingo.
Yes. And now we know it definitely was not that Jane. And on redirect, he was asked by the prosecution, did you ever how many Janes have you ever brought on your plane? And he said 2. Which 2? And he said Jane the victim and personal assistant Jane. So the only Jane it could have been that was flown on that plane was Jane the victim. Now we have nailed down legally that it was Jane the victim who was brought on that plane. Now I understand. So that's it. That sounds like boom. We got him. We got him right there. That you basically, because she testified all about what happened there, as long as they believe anything about what Jane said in her story, as the abuse she suffered in New York when she was taken to Jeffrey Epstein's place you pretty much have them. You certainly have Jeffrey Epstein. The question is, was Ghislaine sufficiently involved in inducing her to get on that plane and go there? And I think there's enough of her story there that she laid out there that if they were moved by Carolyn's story as to what happened, and they heard Kate's story as to how Ghislaine was so intimately involved with everything, and you hear Annie's story about how Ghislaine had her hands on her and had her hands like on her private parts, and we've heard Carolyn talk about how her hands were grabbing her breasts, and all of them talking, and Jane's story about how her first encounter ever was a threesome with Jeffrey and Ghislaine. So you basically have enough there to convict her, and I think that Carolyn's testimony was so gut-wrenching, it's hard to imagine that they're going to be looking to find reasons to let Ghislaine go. And that's why I feel like, look, morally, this woman is evil. They should find ways of prolonging her life and keeping her in prison for 1,000 years and make sure she can't die before then, and put her in a cell which is literally, which gives her 2 inches of breathing room, and leave her there for 1,000 years if they could. That's morally. Legally, I think they have a maximum of 35 years, and I'm hopeful that they're going to find several bases to convict her based on what I laid out here. So I think that was a pretty comprehensive answer to one question. But
yeah, and you answered a few questions I had as far as the most credible witness, and that was surprising to me. But you did delineate that legally versus emotionally, as well as another key point being crossing state lines for federal crimes. But I think the max is actually 40 years for the conspiracy to commit sex trafficking, and then the other ones are 5 to 10, and then the perjury charges are getting tried separately. I
don't know why they're doing that separately. Am I going to have to come back down here for new perjury trials? Is that what we're going to have to do? That we're going to have to cover this one separately, or is it going to be more Ghislaine Maxwell perjury?
Possibly.
Look, the public wants to know, and we aim to please. We aim to serve. So this is something. Look, there's a reason that that these trials are supposed to be made public. Far more reason than what the federal system has as a basis to try and keep them secret and sealed. And it's our duty to help keep the public informed, and that's what we're doing. So
yeah, agreed, Mr. Nierman. I think the public appreciates you for sure. I want to give a big shout out to Mr. Yankee Carpetbagger for the very generous tip on Rockfin. That's kind of where I'm sending people. Rockfin is great. I don't know if you're on there, Mr. Nierman, but I can definitely get you a referral. You have to be referred by a creator, and it's pretty good to get good way to get monetized over there. But his locals is also in the show notes if people want to check that out, and then it's on his screen there.
So what I've been using my locals for is because when I'm talking on YouTube, so everyone wants to know details here. There's certain things that I spend most of my time talking on YouTube, and on locals, I'll basically go in there to cover, super chat questions and comments that people have for me that I couldn't get to during my normal stream, and also to give the gritty details that I can and be far more explicit than I'm permitted to be on YouTube. So, I mean, you've been sitting on this trial. There's just terms and descriptions that YouTube would yeet my channel if I tried talking about. So
yeah,
I save those for my subscribers on locals. So
okay, excellent. Yes, people can obviously go and check that out. And what do you think about the prosecution resting their case? I guess it was yesterday already. That was, I think, surprising to a lot of people.
It was surprising when we heard them say that. We really heard them say that earlier in the week, and we were like, what? Really? So we sort of knew it was coming. It wasn't a surprise that it happened because they said by the end of the week they were planning on doing it. They thought they might do it by the middle of the day on Friday. We lost most of the day of testimony on Thursday because of a lawyer illness. So they managed to cram it all in on Friday. I think it's disappointing. This is something I heard Inner City Press talking about, and I concur with them. You would think that they could have had more Annie farmers come in there, even if it's not something that helps nail it home. But there's been hundreds of victims. There was when Jeffrey Epstein was being tried, and he ended up dying in prison, where frankly I can't imagine that he killed himself. But he ended up, supposedly he's dead. which that I don't know if I'm not sure whether I believe that theory or not, that he's alive. I haven't really gone down the rabbit hole on that one. I know many people think he's not. I don't know. He's not. Let's put it this way: he's never facing trial.
Right.
That's something we know. So when that opportunity was taken away from the victims to testify, so Judge Berman, who was supposed to have that case, he allowed victims to step forward, and they had like 24 women come and cry their story to the judge, just to make a public record of the abuse that they sustained under his hands. And you would think that they probably could have found more than 4. That's all I'm saying. Based on how many came forward there's a lot of women. Maria Farmer, she could have come here. Sarah Ransom. There's, those are names that we've heard in the public, and probably some who would, want to name anonymous. You would think that the jury, we're telling them there's hundreds of victims and we're only showing them 4. I understand you don't want to bring out 100, but 4 seems like very low. It seems very low. And to sit for several weeks and have one witness after another talk about how they met Ghislaine, trusted Ghislaine, you would think that would go a long way toward conviction here. And it's disappointing, even if they're older, even if they were 18 when it happened. But just to show how Ghislaine was the woman of the house. She was the one who they looked to for normalcy. In other words, why do you send a chaperone? Why do you want a chaperone? Because you figure, okay, a woman is going to help create a normal environment and not leave my daughter to a place that she's going to be sexually abused. And quite the contrary of taking that role, she lowered standards of normalcy. She would start talking like a 9-year-old girl about like boys and their weenies. And hey, let's all take off our clothes. Isn't it so fun? Isn't it so fun? Let's play with Jeffy's feet. Like, she's the one showing Annie Farmer how to give a foot massage. Like, we need to learn how to rub his feet the right way. Like this is the woman they're looking to protect them, and quite the contrary, she's basically teaching them how to be a proper sex slave for Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, it's just that's what makes her such a horrific individual.
Yeah. Do you have an idea for why there aren't more witnesses?
No, I mean, I don't know enough about their stories. I don't know enough about like their. I heard Sarah Ransom, her story when she was stuck on Lolita Island and couldn't get off, and she tried running away.
Yeah, like swimming, I guess.
Yeah, she ran down to the shore, and she's mulling the idea of like jumping off a cliff to try to get away from the island. And then Jeffrey comes up behind her because every inch of that island is monitored, and he's like, "Where, what are you doing?" She's like, "Nothing, Jeff." It's just horrific stories, and you would think that. And look, we know that the defense is going to spend a lot of time saying, "Don't try punishing Ghislaine for what Jeffrey did." That's basically what they're going to be saying.
Yeah,
and they're going to split their time between doing that and also having up one expert after another who's going to say that these women they're going to talk about the bias, the media bias, and when you hear stories, you want to become part of the story, and the halo bias, and all the different motivations, psychological motivations that women have to lie, and you can see it by the inconsistency of their stories, how they're trying to find ways to fit in order to have another moment in the spotlight, and that they're glory hogs, and they want money, and basically say that there's just countless reasons to distrust the testimony that we've heard. Look, we haven't heard it yet, so until we hear it, I can't tell you how effective their arguments will be, and we'll have to see how they're cross-examined by the state. I'll tell you this: as far as the level of lawyering that we see, it's been a very, very high level of litigation that we've seen. I'm like, for example, I watch the Rittenhouse day by day, a Rittenhouse trial, and the level of lawyering on both sides, the prosecution and defense. I don't mean any offense to anyone. Sharafi was really good. I had questions about everything else that we saw going on there, and yeah, the lawyering that we're seeing here is just top grade. Like, these are people who understand what's happening in ways that, and they understand how to try a case, and they understand how to move a jury, and they understand. On the first full day, let me point this out to you. The first full day of of testimony. We were, I think, 2.5, 3 hours. It might have even been after lunch when we heard our first objection. And I was thinking to myself, during the Rittenhouse trial, we kept screaming, objection, objection, objection. And when we heard the objection, it was Pomerantz who raised the objection on cross-examination. And I actually called out half a second before her, objection. And she said, objection, relevance, and or objection called speculation. And I was like, oh my God, that's the first objection we heard all day. And it wasn't because of people not objecting. It's because these are seasoned professionals who know how to frame their questions and line them up in ways that are appropriate, and that they're relevant, and they're calling for eyewitness testimony and everything, worded in ways that are an art form. You can't appreciate how difficult it is to go through hours of testimony without asking an objectionable question. And just watching it on display, it was really impressive. It was an impressive comment about the level of lawyering that we're looking at here. Now, would I have done certain things differently if I was Comey? For sure. I mean, but I think certainly with respect to redactions, I think we've seen a lot from the state that they don't want us to. They don't want to make a public record out of the big names, and especially who went to the Virgin Islands. I don't know. I haven't looked what's out there. Have you looked what's out there to see like what we could find with respect to the flight logs?
I haven't looked too deeply into that. But that was another question I was going to ask you, just the level of redactions the prosecution has been doing. It seems like almost, the majority of the documents are, we don't even get to see. They're admitted under seal or temporary seal to be checked for possible redactions.
And it seems like, it's what's so aggravating is, with Carolyn, for example, they showed a picture of her when she was 14. The implication is that she was not at all undressed when she was in that picture, but just to let the jury let her know what she looked like when she was 14, that they didn't that's under seal. Why is that under seal? I don't know. It's probably it looks like a 14-year-old girl, fully dressed, at some event or something like that, taking a picture that we get to see her at 14. Why is that under seal? I don't know. There's just like, if there's ever a thought of maybe there's a reason to seal this, they're going to seal it. When they're doing redaction of the people who flew on flights, many of the flights is just completely just Jeffrey Epstein flying alone on his plane. We don't know, but a lot of them, they were redacted. And even worse than that is this, the judge, I want to point this out to you, which I haven't really made clear to my own audience, but I'll make this clear to your audience, and I'll probably share with my audience at a later time. And that is, okay, so initially, what did Comey do? She took the flight logs and she blacked out all the names. At first, we have the whole book here, and she blacks out all the names. Then the judge sees this, and she's like, at the lunch break, she's like, why are you blacking out all the names? Why not just black out the names of the victims? And she's like, well, it was under stress. There's a lot of time. It was just quicker to just black out all the names and do that. So I want to explain to you, does it take longer to block out individual names? Yes. Do you need to have your top lawyer black out the names? No. You can get Eddie from the mailroom to go through the flight logs, and he'll spend 15 minutes. And you say, if you see the name Jane, if you see the name Kate, if you see the name Carolyn, if you see the name Annie, block. Even Annie wouldn't have to block out, right? Because she's saying her name. You see any of those three names, block them out. Everyone else, leave. And it would take him 15 minutes. It doesn't take very long at all. So to say that we didn't have time to do it, that's a lie. It's a complete crap lie. And it's completely because she just didn't want the names that are left over there to be seen. And the judge is like, I don't really accept that excuse. I'm going to tell you to modify your redactions and let those names be shown. And the judge's like, and Comey's like, well, can we have till Thursday to do that? And she said, fine. Okay, I'll give you to next Thursday. So next Thursday is when that's supposed to be released. But then what does she do the next day? She starts trimming which pages from the flight book are going to come in, and instead of making the whole flight book come in, the whole maintenance thing, just those specific pages. So now, unless you have a big name that flew like the same day that Jane flew, the same day that Kate flew, we're not gonna see any of those other pages. So, I mean, what are the chances? Unless Prince Albert or Prince Edward, whoever he was
Andrew.
Prince Andrew, Prince Albert. Let's Prince Andrews. Let's Prince Andrews on the flying on the flight with on that thing. We're not going to see Prince Andrew's name, and it's so wrong. It's so wrong. But they're bending over backwards to protect these celebrity, high profile, most of them completely left wing. Because I'll tell you this much: if it was Donald Trump's name, it would be there. You would have
for sure.
You would see that. We would have known about it before the 2020 election. It would have been all over. Here he is going to the Virgin Islands, and everyone knows that when you go to the Virgin Islands, you're taking a 20-minute helicopter ride over to Little St. James to get the Lolita special from whatever girls they can procure for that trip. And that's basically why they did. But he didn't go there. I am sure he didn't go there, because if he had gone there, we would have heard long time ago. Yeah. But as opposed to the opposite is, if I'm sure, you tell me why the sitting president was in the 1990s, 94, this guy, Bill Clinton, literally had Air Force One at his command. Why the hell he ever needed to borrow or get on Jeffrey Epstein's plane unless he was going down to the Virgin Islands? There's no, because you don't want to you don't want to take Air Force One to the Virgin Islands. So fine, unless he was going there, tell me why. Tell me one legitimate reason why he would be going. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, and maybe it was later that he went there. That he's borrowing the plane. I don't know. Did he bring his Secret Service on the plane with him? Because he's got Secret Service traveling with him for the rest of his life after he serves as president. Did they come on the plane with him? And I'm just like, I don't even understand what the hell is happening here with Clinton. It's just very, very, it's very boggling to me. And it's and the desperation to retain secrecy it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Yes, I was talking about that with Mr. Lee on Inner City Press, as you mentioned.
You need to hook me up with him, because I don't know where to find this guy.
He's elusive. I got to say, whenever I catch him, it's only for about 5 minutes, and then he's off. So I'll try to catch him next week, because as people have seen on my Twitter, I'm getting the usually just the defense going in, and then the siblings. But Kevin Maxwell, the brother, has been quite hermetic this past week. I only saw him, I think, once. Yeah. And then the prosecution too. I've only seen them just once. It was Monday morning.
Do you date your footage?
I post it minutes after, so I don't date it on the with a watermark or anything. But on my Twitter, everything I've captured, I posted the same day so far. So
if you look back in your footage to a week ago Friday, walking out by lunchtime, I was walking. I didn't even know who Kevin was. Like I don't. You're really on top of this stuff. I'm so exactly opposite. Like I don't know anything about her family or stuff like that. I think I saw him, but I didn't even know his name. And I'm walking outside, and Kevin is walking like a few feet in front of me, and there's paparazzi all around him. I think you were one of them. So I sped up my gait so that I was walking alongside him, and I sort of looked over at him, and I was like, I think they want your picture. So he laughed, and he's like, "You think?" I was like, "Are you famous?" So he's like, "No."
Wow,
I was like, "What's your name?" And he said, "Kevin." I said, "Hi, I'm Joe," and just let him go on his way. But so you probably might actually see that exchange because you might have been filming. It was before I met you, so you might actually have been filming it, and that'd be actually a pretty funny thing to see. But
that's impressive. You got a response from him because he's been entirely closed.
Well, I'm not asking him about the Mossad. You come out out of the gate. It's like you don't come with a hello, how are you? You come out there with okay. Here's my Mauser. I'm just gonna shoot this off at you. Now, please answer some questions for me. I come over and I don't know who the guy is. Look, I don't know that he's an evil guy. A lot of people just have screwed up siblings. Is he a bad guy? Could be a terrible guy. He could be worse than Jeffrey Epstein, or he could be someone who's gotten. I don't know anything about the dude. So that's why I'm like, I don't know. I don't know anything about him. I just thought it was funny watching the paparazzi swinging around him, and so I just sort of was kind of enjoying the moment. I was like, I guess I'll end up on TV here if I'm I'm walking alongside Kevin Maxwell.
You were in the background of I think a couple of my videos. Actually, I had the plug for this chat you were, but he has been implicated in some financial crimes in Jersey and the United Kingdom involving basically
Oh,
a
has he?
tax evasion scheme for the rich.
Oh, has he?
With his brother. So
Not
I was
surprising. That's not surprising, but
yeah. But you're right. Maybe you should ask him about the Mossad because maybe you got a little tiny bit of modicum of trust built up after that brief
this is the
interaction.
whole Jew thing now. Is this where you're going?
Oh no,
Oh,
definitely
you're
not.
saying now that he likes me. Now that I actually said, "Hey, Kevin, how are you?"
Oh, are you
Yeah,
Jewish?
I am. Yeah, I'm
Okay,
actually
okay. Yeah,
sandwiches
see, I
though.
didn't even know that. Yeah,
That's funny. No, I don't care. I joke around about that. I never assume anyone is going down that road. But
sure.
he, I did hear someone was telling me like a few hours ago that Robert was confirmed as being a member of the Mossad. That
Definitely,
his father, Robert, had been a confirmed member of the Mossad,
definitely.
and yeah, does that mean that his family is in the Mossad? I don't know. Is that sort of thing? I don't know if that's the sort of thing that sort of works like royalty. It's like it goes from father to son,
Sure.
or the father to daughter. I don't know.
Yeah.
Look, there's a lot of weird questions you can ask about how the government dealt with Jeffrey Epstein. 100%. There are a lot of weird questions as to like the deal that Alex Acosta cut for him in 2009, which was insanity. I mean, it was just insanity how they gave him this sweetheart deal for a year and a half, and the guy and that's it for all the crimes that the guy did leading up to there, and not just washing his own hands, but washing the hands of Ghislaine Maxwell and Sarah Kellen and three other
Yeah.
women. It's like, what are you kidding me? Like, like,
Yeah.
like, do they? It's almost like like he's Kaiser Soze. Like they're scared to like touch him, otherwise, their families are all going to end up dead. Like, why would you give him a deal like this? And then when he didn't even really go to prison, the prison
No.
sentence that he
No.
served, he spent a year and a half where he literally they let him leave the prison and then come back there to sleep at night. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a joke. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a
He would go
complete
in
and
his
total joke. What?
helicopter. He had a Bell helicopter. He would like fly in his helicopter while he was supposed to be
In prison.
incarcerated. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was actually a comment here from Bruce. Was Sarah Vickers or Sarah Kellen Vickers' name brought up anytime in this trial? It's actually been brought up a couple times, and
Yeah.
I think it was Caroline who basically testified that Sarah Kellen produced child pornography as far as I could tell. Do you remember
Yes.
that?
Yeah. She in fact, she actually said how Sarah Kellen paid her $600 or $700 to when she was like 14 or 15 to do a photo shoot wearing nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, sir, about.
Which Sarah herself took the pictures.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. So
Yeah.
she facilitated that and took the pictures. The Sergeant Michael Dawson of the he's Florida cop. What did you think about the stipulation that came right away Monday morning, first thing, whereby he didn't have to come back? They said it was for his own convenience.
Yeah. I was
What
thinking about that.
was that out of the ordinary in your experience, or what did you think?
It's a little unusual. I think that I've got to go through my notes to remember what it was that they stipulated about, where they basically were saying, look, this is what he would have said. And it's not a crazy thing to happen because he's from out of state. He's from Florida. They didn't want to make him stay for the weekend. And they said, look, he had done, he had started testifying before lunch. And then he went all the way through the afternoon. And I think they felt like there was like, another half hour of testimony, maybe, and that he would have testified to XYZ. So they said, let's just let that come in on stipulation. I don't think that is anything. I don't think there's anything illicit or corrupt about that. I think that's a matter
Okay.
of just
Okay.
accommodating him so he wouldn't have to spend all weekend here to spend 30 minutes in court on Monday. So,
Okay. Sure.
yeah.
Among either side, prosecution and defense, which single lawyer have you been most impressed with, and which single lawyer have you been least impressed with? If you could point to one individual for either of those. I know I have my own take, but you're a litigator yourself with much experience, so your opinion obviously holds a lot more weight.
I've been least impressed with Jeff Paliuka.
Okay.
I think that his cross-examination of Carolyn, it was way too long. And I thought that his cross-examination of Alessi, I thought was terrible. I thought that when he cross-examined Juan Alessi last Thursday, Friday, that he gave Juan Alessi opportunities to say things and make Ghislaine Maxwell look much worse than she had before he finishes direct. I mean, on cross-examination, he started going into detail about how Ghislaine Maxwell drove him around to different masseuse parlors. Every freaking masseuse parlor from Boca Raton to Jupiter, Florida, that he would drive her somewhere, and then she would pop out and go in there and give her card around and basically start scouting out the talent in every masseuse parlor she can. And this is showing how she's so working so hard to try and find more and more girls that she herself. This is like the worst testimony for him to elicit, and trying to catch him on stupid little technicalities of things that he had said when he's not a native English speaker. And this is another thing when you read a transcript you can't appreciate, is that
his accent.
He's just reading the words. It's not just, you're right about, it's not just the accent. Even the choice of words that he says. He literally will start a question where they'll say, did you ever tell the police about X? And he'll start off and say no, and then spend the next 15 words saying yes, because he literally, that's just his English is kind of, and so anyone who's listening to him understands that he really means yes, but just the word that comes out of his mouth is no. And he would do it the opposite way also. So he'd be like, did you tell the police about that you went to the house? And he said, no, I went to the police and I spoke to them about the fact that I went to the house. It's like, why did you say no? And so when you read the transcript, he sounds like he's confused. He doesn't know what he's talking about. If you listen to him speak, you're just like, oh, okay, he's from Ecuador. He doesn't really understand English. And he just, he just a words blurred out of his mouth. So when Pagliuca is trying to use a deposition from him from 4 years ago, he'll be like, he'll read that question off. He'll like, you were asked, did you tell the police? And you said no. And then it's like, okay, read the rest of the sentence. And it's like obvious he was really saying yes. So he comes across like some douchebag who's like trying to portray as if he's changing his story, when if you read everything in context that he said last time, you understand that that's not, that he's entirely consistent today with what he said last time. And this happened over and over again. So I thought some of his cross-examinations were terrible. I thought the way he dealt with Carolyn was effective, but in that he was not hostile. It's tough. It's very tough to cross-examine, especially for a man. It's very tough to cross-examine a woman who's been a victim of sex abuse, because you don't want the jury to look at you as if you're now abusing her. And start thinking of you as if you're Jeffrey Epstein who's haunting her now. So it's a very, very tough position. That's why they tend to put women as cross-examination, like Laura Menninger did Jane. Laura Menninger did Annie Farmer. Yeah. And I think it was Bobby who did Kate. So and Bobby is a female, in case you're wondering, Bobbi.
Bobby Stern.
So,
who you've actually spoken to a couple times in the hallway.
I have spoken to Bobby Sternheim. And I'll tell you this, I told her that I thought her team overall was pretty strong. And I have, especially coming out of the Rittenhouse, I thought her team was pretty strong. I also was basically pleading with her to put those names forward. I wanted those names come public. So I tried giving her motivation as to like how it might help her client, because I want those names. And if Trump did go to Virgin Islands, I want his name out there. I want the name of every one of these jerks to be exposed who went down there and took advantage of these girls. Have you watched any of these specials? Have you watched any of these specials about like Ghislaine Maxwell or Jeffrey Epstein or whatever?
The documentaries you're referring to?
Yeah,
I've seen a couple of them. I saw the Filthy Rich one, and then they made another one right after. I watched both. I thought Filthy Rich was much more well produced. The second one seemed very rushed to me. I'm talking about the ones on Netflix right now.
Right. I saw Filthy Rich. I didn't see any others. I saw Filthy Rich.
Yeah.
So they had that phone operator guy, right? That phone operator guy, who, by the way, he also would be a great witness. I don't know.
That was actually my favorite episode when it was about the island, and he was you talking about the communications guy?
Yeah, communications guy.
Yeah,
he's
like, that was great.
He basically would see these girls who looked crazy young walking around in no clothing on the island there, and that he got so sickened by it that he quit and wouldn't work there anymore, because it was just so sickening to watch these underage girls basically walking around his pool and hanging out with him, with certainly without a top on. So I don't know if they were completely starkers, but they were without a top on. And you're talking about, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls who were clearly underage. And he's like, I can't watch this. I can't be here for this.
It was actually the pool guy. One of the pool guys came up to him and said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "For the money." And he asked him, he's like, "Do you have any children?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Would you let your daughters on the island?" And he said, Well, at that moment, I realized, I wouldn't let my daughters within 5 miles of Jeffrey Epstein, and then he quit shortly after
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and that's pretty much. I thought that he would be a great person to have up there, just so that everyone can understand how this sort of display of underage activity was so prevalent, and that
Mm.
she was so tolerant of it and encouraging of it, that I think it just could have helped. Look, they might did the defense argue that it's prejudicial and it's not probative of any evidence of wrongdoing by Ghislaine? Possibly they went through it. I don't know. I don't know about the pretrial litigation that they had.
Mm.
It's possible they had motions like, keep that guy out and make the point that, hey, he knows nothing about Ghislaine individually. He's not beneficial as far as letting the jury know what culpability Ghislaine has. I'm sure the defense would have made a motion to keep him out if the defense did bring him in. So that is one of the things that, especially if you're not an attorney, it's hard to understand. In that, look, we don't want people to be convicted because they're unlikable. We want them to be convicted for
Right.
crimes.
Right.
And that's a healthy thing about our American system, that they shouldn't be convicted for being unlikable, but only for breaking the law. So if you tell stories about her, that involve her, that there are character assassinations, that is testimony that is impermissible under any rules of evidence that govern in any court in this country, especially in federal court. So something like that could be deemed something that's prejudicial and not remotely probative as to whether or not Ghislaine herself committed a crime. And that could explain why a lot of these witnesses are not here. That the United States is prohibited from bringing a lot of these witnesses in unless they can, unless the judge approves and says this will help the jury get a better picture as to Ghislaine's role in in um, and basically serving as a honeypot to lure women
Right.
or girls to Jeffrey Epstein. So that is a factor that we should consider before we slam the government about the way they handled and who they brought forward here.
Sure.
Is that even if they want to bring forward 100 witnesses, unless it helps show culpability or give a new element as far as understanding Ghislaine's role here in seducing these girls toward Jeffrey Epstein, the defense certainly would have moved to have them kept out, because they would be considered prejudicial and inflaming rather than probative of the evidence. And the judge is a very by the book judge. And even if she personally hates Ghislaine Maxwell, she's going to follow the rules of evidence the way a
Mhm.
judge should.
Yeah.
And she would have kept them out. So in that sense, it could be frustrating to us who want to see her get convicted, and yet at the same time, that's just the way our American judicial system works. So,
What about the lawyer you've been most impressed with? You said least impressive was Apollyuka. Most impressive so far. Who do you think
um,
that would be on either side?
I'll tell you this: Comey's redirect there was art. That was, I mean, in general, I haven't thought that she's been great. They've
Sure.
all been very good. Let me put it this way: they've all been very good. If any one of them was in the Rittenhouse trial, they probably would have been. Practically any one of these attorneys, if they were in the Rittenhouse trial, they would have been the best attorney there. So
Mhm.
that's the level of lawyering that we're talking about here. Whether you're talking about Pomerantz or you're talking about Allison Moe, or you're talking about on the defense side Laura Menninger, um,
Everdale.
Everdale's been really good.
I
Actually, I think he's been really really good.
Yeah.
Um,
I
he,
thought I was gonna say I pegged Polyuka likewise as the least impressive, and I thought my amateur opinion that it is. I thought Everdale was the most impressive, but that's just
that's not
me.
a bad call. That's not a bad
Yeah.
call. He's been very, very effective. Apparently, he was the one who cross-examined the FedEx guy, the FedEx woman, and that was also something that was an important piece for the defense to try and get Carolyn. As I said, that FedEx thing was really critical for the state in order to give the jury a basis to hang a conviction for the abuses of Carolyn. And if from what I've read, I didn't get to see it, but from what I've read of that testimony, Everdell did a great job of convincing the jury that Ghislaine didn't send it. And if
Mhm.
Ghislaine didn't send it, they're going to point out in closing argument 100%. Ghislaine never sent it. It was clearly sent by Jeffrey Epstein. She cannot be convicted for anything that happened with Carolyn. And it's tough to counter that. It's tough to counter that when her name is on certain deliveries and not on that one. So why would it not be on, and Jeffrey Epstein's is on that one. So why would her name not be on that one? Jeffrey Epstein's being if Ghislaine did it. And that's killer. But in general, he's been very professional in the way he sort of sets everything up.
Yeah. I wanted
Did you
to
notice
ask
Laura Menninger? I just want to ask you this. I was
Yeah.
actually mocking Laura Menninger, her cross-examination, which I think she did a fairly good job in breaking down Jane. And I thought she decimated Jane. She really did a good job of killing her.
But she smiled at me the other day. It's kind of weird. She like held eye contact with me for like 4 or 5 seconds. And
Menninger? You got a thing going on with Menninger now? Is that the deal?
I don't know what's going on there.
You and Laura sitting tree? All right. So so she has one thing that's to me almost comical. Like she was asking Annie Farmer. She's like, she comes out of the gate and she's like, so because Annie just finished telling her story, how she went to New York, and she said on direct, she never met Ghislaine in New York, had nothing to do with Ghislaine in New York, but this is the first time she's meeting Jeffrey Epstein and the uncomfortable touching she had with him. And then a few weeks later, she goes to New Mexico, which is the first time she ever hears of and meets Ghislaine Maxwell. So now a cross-examination. This is what we get from Laura Menninger. So Ghislaine Maxwell had nothing to do with your trip to New York, right? That's correct. So she didn't buy you the tickets to New York, right? Right. She didn't meet you at the airport in New York, right? She didn't drive you from the airport to his house in New York. No, she didn't take you shopping in New York. That's right? Yeah. Look, we already know she wasn't in New York. No, she didn't take it to Phantom Opera in New York. No, she wasn't sitting in the back row of the movie theater in New York. No, she wasn't shooting the projector of the movie in New York. No, she didn't touch your leg in New York. No, you didn't talk to her in the movie theater in New York. No, she didn't take you shopping for underwear in New York. No, we all know this, but it's like we knew from the first question, but it's just like literally like 36 questions about what did Ghislaine do with you in New York, when it's like, really? Like, is this not insulting to our intelligence that you're just pounding this home, which she's already admitted out of the gate, like Ghislaine Maxwell was not involved in apparently this is really like mystifying stuff to her, but I don't know.
Yeah. And then Comey being, her participation in general, what did you think about that? Because she was actually going to be part of the 2016 or 2019, the first prosecution of Epstein there until he didn't die, or until he didn't kill himself. Do you think that's weird with all, and maybe you could testify to, so many lawyers, I'm sure many of them great lawyers in New York, and Comey gets arguably two of the biggest criminal conspiracy cases ever.
I can't speak to that. I don't know. I don't know about the politics of that. I don't want to weigh in on that, and also how they choose who's going to be handling this sort of thing. Again, I'm not the sort of person who just assumes that someone who is a relative is basically a carbon copy. I know I'm very different from my dad, for example. My dad is an amazing person. I know I'm very different from him in a lot of different ways, probably in ways that are to my detriment rather than my compliment. But there are a lot of ways that I'm different from my dad. So that's why I don't assume that Maureen Comey is a carbon copy of James Comey. Does that mean that she's not very similar to him? She might be. I don't know. She started making me I thought what she did with redacting the names was very sus, Sure. So and that made me start being, when I heard that she was, James Comey's daughter. So I was like, all right, that tells me keep my eyes open for something. And then I see what happened to redaction. I'm like, okay, this is now getting very sus. And then I see a lack of witnesses. I'm like, I don't know if I want to give her the benefit of the doubt that she couldn't get them in or question what's going on here. But I do think overall the professionalism of this team and how they've put their case together from what they have put up there, I thought was very effective. So, okay. It's not like they didn't put up, they seemed well prepped. They seemed well prepared. They seem to be, from what I've seen, they're aggressive. Why is it there weren't more people? Like I said, I question that. I don't know if we'll ever have a real answer to that, but I do know that a great many of them probably could not be brought in because the judge would just not allow it because they're inflammatory rather than being probative of the evidence. So as far as where I stand on the whole Comey thing in here, I'm telling you, I'm not in the camp which says this is a whole fix this is all like rigged type of thing. I'm not in that camp, but I'm not in the middle anymore where I started. I'm more like in sort of leaning like, yeah, this is a little bit upsetting. This is a little bit upsetting, especially the redactions. That got me. That just was like a red flag to me. Like that there's something happening here which should not be happening. So
but you said they are set to release those on Thursday or to fix those up.
yeah, but what did they do is they said we're going to focus on exhibit 52A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, which is each one page. And those are the exhibits. I don't know if they're putting in, I don't think they're putting in the whole book.
Okay.
So that's why not put in the whole book? Why not? Unless you're trying to protect people. And to me, that reeks of, does that mean they're not going, let's focus on it. Let's get locked in here. Let's get focused. There's two different things that are happening that we're talking about in one conversation, and that makes things a little blurry. So let's try to clarify. One is, are they genuinely trying to do everything they can to convict Ghislaine Maxwell? And the other is, are they doing everything they can, or what steps are they taking to protect the circle of elites? Those are two different things. And I think it's very possible to say that they're working their tails off trying to convict Ghislaine Maxwell.
Sure.
And at the same time, they're working their tails off to protect the political elites.
Definitely a possibility.
And I think those two things are definitely happening. That's my gut.
Yeah.
That's my gut. I haven't seen anything to show that they're trying to tank this conviction. I think they're really working hard to try and convict Ghislaine Maxwell. And as far as what we're looking for from our justice system, that's really what the purpose of the justice system is, more than exposing the political elite. There are other ways to try and go around that sort of thing with FOIA requests and other things. That's not the role of a conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell, So
definitely. Yeah, it's a good point there. The last question here, Mr. Nierman, want to be respectful of your time. What do you think? Obviously, we haven't heard the defense yet. What do you think the likely outcome at this point is in terms of acquittal, either partially or completely, or convictions either partially or completely? And then if you have any other thoughts you wanted to share that we didn't get to tonight.
I think we covered a lot. I mean, I think it's a good question to close on. I think that, look, I'm not going to marry this position because, as you said, we haven't heard from the defense yet. And the defense can they're going to have very expensive psychologists get up there and tell us how every one of these women is conjuring up these things they make up in their mind and then convince themselves it's true after the fact. So I'm sure we're going to hear all sorts of testimony about that. I've heard enough by talking to people who have been in the room, not in the viewing room with us, but in the jury room, where they talked about how the jury is responding to things. That, for example, when Carolyn was up on this, when it was being cross-examined, that one of the jurors spent like a considerable amount of time just looking at Jeff Pagliuca like this.
Oh,
that's very encouraging. That's very, very encouraging that they're feeling sympathy for the victims and that they don't like them. So, and I think there's enough here. Do I think she'll be convicted on everything? No, probably not. But I think I'll be surprised if she's not remanded to the custody of the prison when this thing is over, and that she walks away scot-free. Will she get the lengthy sentence that we're all hoping for? I don't know. But I think that she's going to be convicted on one or two of these charges at least.
Yeah, I think Pagliuca is definitely a lot of people's least favorite. I didn't bring up the fact that he was I think twice he said the victims' real names. I actually asked him the other day, "Why'd you do that, Mr. Pagliuca? Are you trying to? Is that an intimidation tactic?" Of course, no
answer, no comment, no comment. I asked Christian Everdell why he didn't cross-examine the pilots about Mark Rogers about the names of the people who flew on the plane, about the names of the big people who flew on the plane, and he gave me a no comment. So.
Sure. Well, where do you want to direct people, sir? You got your channel.
So what I would tell you is, my YouTube channel is called GoodLawgic. I think it's down there in the description. Yep. I urge you guys to check it out. I'm dropping on this thing. I drop a video after morning testimony. I drop a second video after we wrap trial for the day. And then I do a 2-hour live stream from 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern, where I sort of cover everything that we had that day. I live stream in general every day. I don't know if I'm going to be doing 100% Ghislaine Maxwell during the next 3 days when there's no trial. But from Sunday to Thursday, and certainly I'm live streaming 10 till midnight Eastern. And I also have several appearances lined up. I'm supposed to be on Adam and Sitch tomorrow at 4 p.m. And yeah, I appreciate if you can follow, like, share, subscribe. If you're going to follow me on YouTube, I will tell you this. I get complaints from people every day, literally every day. I thought I subscribed to you. I was subscribed to you. I was unsubscribed. So I urge you, hit the bell. And that's the best way that you can sort of keep your grip on actually following me to get updates. Because really, there's almost, I'm pretty sure, look, Lee, who's doing Inner City Press, he's an attorney. Aside from him, he basically, what his focus is actual transcript, like just,
Right.
And he's great. He's great at
he
serving as getting quotes out and tweeting that during the trial. As far as providing legal assessment of what's going on there, I don't think there's any other lawyers out there who are doing that.
Yeah.
So I urge
please go follow Mr. Nierman, GoodLawgic. But I was gonna say the only time he does give that analysis, I think, is when I stop him when he's going in, if I catch him for like 5 minutes. So
right.
But I'll bring you up next time I see him.
I would love to have him on. I would love to bring him in and sit down with him as like the only two lawyers who are watching this case to get his feel about it and ask him certain questions about various moments. He missed that moment. I didn't see it in his tweets. Maybe I missed the tweet, but he didn't even mention that moment where Mark Rogers said no, Jane was that personal assistant Jane was in 2003. That was like I didn't notice. That's a big miss. That's a big miss, which made me want which
because there was me. Wow. And then you, and then one other person right away were like, oh my goodness, because that was so big, right?
And the rest of the room, I think, was just dead silent. They were confused, like, what happened? What happened? What happened? And we're like, what? That's the whole case. That's the whole case right there.
Yeah. So that was big. I don't know what happened with Mr. Lee, him missing that, but I'll definitely bring him up. Next time.
Get him in touch with me on Twitter.
Okay.
Tell him that like I'd like to hook up with him because I think he and I should sit down and talk. And for the audience, I'd love to have him on my show and get his thoughts and stuff.
For sure.
Awesome. I'd like to meet him. I mean, he seems like an interesting guy. I saw him on Viva Fry, and I'd like to hook up with him. So
yeah, I saw that.
You were both commenting. Yeah, you and I were both commenting
in the chat there. But thank you so much, Mr. Nierman.
My pleasure.
To do it again, and hopefully, we can make it happen. And I'd love to talk to you about your own career at some point if you'd be up for that. But this might be done by Christmas. So
yeah, who knows?
Take it day by day, I guess.
Yeah, we got. Are you going to be sitting there waiting around day by day, like when they're on deliberations?
Would there be? Maybe perhaps you can help me with that. Would there be a good drive to do that, or could I get some good work on that, or would it not be worth it? It'd be better just working at home.
I can't. I'm sort of torn because how far away are you from the courthouse? How long does it take you to get there?
I'm pretty close, actually. I'm like about 15 minutes away. I'm in Greenwich, Greenwich Village. It's called.
Oh yeah. So you'll have plenty. You should have 45 minutes to an hour of a heads up from when news breaks that the jury has reached a verdict until they actually assemble everyone in there and get in there. My concern is I live an hour away. I'm like, when they say the jury has reached a verdict, if I go racing out to the courthouse, I'm never going to make it there in time because I got to be there for the reading of the verdict. I'm married to this thing this far. I can't miss the damn verdict. Right. So I don't know what I think I'm going to have to hang out in New York and basically find something to do there so I can be there whenever the jury reaches its decision. But who knows? We'll see.
We will indeed. Again, check out his links and stay frosty, folks. Thanks everybody for joining us. Ghislaine Maxwell trial coverage continues with Addy Ads and Joe Nierman of GoodLawgic. See everybody next time.